this increasing arm twist carbon intensive entities were feeling, razor thin margins, and increasingly what we saw was carbon reductive solutions were increasingly actually more economical, and Gravity was born out of that. Believe you me, if I had continued my college physics education and I could get into fusion research, the amount of intrigue that I have in those types of technologies is immense. The impact is marginal. Similar to product market fit, I would say founder problem fit, and I didn't have founder problem fit. We built this for entities with complex physical operations. They are up-leveling internal talent, right? This is not somebody who knows the GHG protocol. I think the pragmatism one is massive. Every dollar we take from somebody cannot be to give them a sticker. It needs to come back as $5 in energy savings.
Welcome back to Clean Techies, the #1 podcast for climate tech entrepreneurs. If industrial decarbonization is something you are passionate about, something that keeps you up at night, we have got the company for you. Today, our guest is Saleh ElHattab, CEO and founder of Gravity, a GHG accounting platform. Yes, I know it's another GHG accounting platform, but wait, it is not just any old GHG accounting platform. And let me tell you, we have had dozens reach out to us, so we know when we see this. They have a superpower that helps them close deals. They have built an entire marketplace of electrification and decarbonization partners that their clients get access to. And not only that, they've negotiated better prices and special deals for all of them. So just an incredible value add on top of their platform. In addition to this, they've built the platform to be highly user-friendly so that you do not have to be any kind of climate scientist to understand it. This allows their product to fly off the shelves because they are selling with all parties' interests in mind. CEOs and CFOs love the ROI mentality that they get out of using the product. They save procurement teams a ton of time and money, and they allow sustainability teams to get the reporting done in a very efficient manner. It's genuinely an incredible example of ensuring alignment to make sure your sales process is smooth. And before we get started, if you're not already, go to Substack and click subscribe. Maybe you're feeling particularly generous today. Drop in the old credit card details so you can support our mission financially, and comment on with any guests you'd like to see come on the show. All right, enjoy the episode. All right, welcome to the show. How's it going, man?
It's going pretty well. Thanks for having me, Silas.
Yeah, super glad to finally do this. I have to, admit my sins initially before we get started that we had to reschedule this several times. Always my fault. So glad we're making it happen. But I guess give us a quick intro to yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, my name is Saleh. I'm the CEO of a company called Gravity. It's in the space of industrial decarbonization, which is highly buzzwordy. So I'm looking forward to dissecting that with you. I'm based out of New York. And I spent a lot of time between New York and San Francisco since the company's based out of there. But that's me in a nutshell. I'm excited to tell you more.
So what is exactly the problem that you're solving? Tell us more about that specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I think it's worth calling out that the term decarbonization has attracted 1,001 companies at this point. So the specific corner of that space that we're focused on is really kind of carbon and energy management. And increasingly we focus on the latter, which is energy management. Reason being that we saw a market that had an increasing narrative around compliance and disclosure, which I think is fantastic as it elucidates a lot of the surface area that people need to actually measure in order to manage. But we actually didn't see as much on the side of supporting tools for those who are most carbon intensive. So that's one thing that we like to focus on. And separately on speaking their language, which is traditional business priorities, cost savings, and risk management. And so we're very focused through a software approach, helping with the front half of that, which is regulatory or customer market pressures to disclose. We help them automate that process. But we get really excited to have a marketplace that actually satiates their needs to cut energy spend, to react to geopolitical impacts on natural gas, et cetera, et cetera. And so we work with them to actually execute projects that make them more resilient while reducing their energy consumption and emissions.
Interesting. So is this something that's somewhat new for the industrial sector that they need to be focused on these? I'm assuming compliance is not a new thing, but can you tell us more about that? Like, is it something that the other companies in, I guess you could say, carbon accounting or energy management haven't been solving for recently, and that you're kind of filling that gap?
Yeah, I would say that given the absolute multitude of companies in the space, there are some that are still focused on industrials as well. So we are not completely alone in the space of working with carbon intensive entities. And it's worth calling out that not only do we go directly to them, but we also go to the companies that depend on them or invest in them. So if you're a large corporate with a supply chain that's heavily physical and industrial, we also work with you to help manage your supply chain. And we work with private equity firms and similar who have portfolios of infrastructure and industrial companies. I flag that because that's actually very crowded, the space of trying to land the Fortune
Yeah.
500s, as well as the space of landing the private equities. But to have built a purpose built solution for the industrial, the actual emissions generator, is a much smaller subset of the market. And for that market, I would say we are increasingly an industry leader.
Hmm. And can you share any data points around what emissions industry is actually responsible for globally?
Yeah. I think the different kind of back of napkin and very intensive consultative research shows anywhere between 30 to 70% of emissions are related to industry, depending on your definition of it. We use the number 40%. That is not even accounting for like the built environment or like concrete and things like that. This is purely like year over year, the operations of these organizations, which fall into industry, think manufacturing and similar, compose about 40% of the world's emissions.
Okay, got it. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think we'll get into that in a bit with the market positioning and how you guys determined, that specific segment and things of that nature. But something I did want to ask from your upbringing, like, were there any particular influences that eventually led you to wanting to build a company? I'm always kind of curious about this personally.
Yeah.
What made somebody decide to chew glass, right? As a lot of people say, as entrepreneurship is. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, first I'm dealing with that beautifully vivid image of chewing glass. But aside from that, on the notion of starting a company, deciding to do it, there are some people who are like, I want to be an entrepreneur, and regardless of whatever problem they find, they want to spearhead it and be the leader. And then there are some that are like extremely passionate about a problem, and that's kind of what draws them to build the company for it. And if they weren't passionate about it, they didn't necessarily have the itch to be the entrepreneur. I'm somewhere in the middle. I always had a niche, but I wanted to make sure that there was something that really kind of bothered me in my free time that I wanted to solve for. And climate very much fell into that. In terms of upbringing, I was born into a middle class family of immigrants in Indiana. Both my parents made their way over here from Egypt before I was born. And a lot of my friends ended up working in the kind of economy that was common to that region. So my siblings worked in warehouses. A lot of my friends became linemen for utilities. And I liked computers, if I'm being honest with you, and video games. So I won't lie and say that I had as much dirt under my nails at that time, but I was definitely familiar and adjacent to it. Going back to Egypt, my father's side of the family is a little bit more rural. My mother's side of the family, a little bit more city folk. So it's always kind of been a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And so for me, I really fell in love with the marriage of atoms and bits, I say. So software and the physical world. Before coming to Gravity, I was at a company called Samsara. And Samsara built hardware for industrial systems, right? Telematic systems for trucks, dash cameras for safety, machine health monitors, everything in between. And that made me just continue to fall in love with something that had been really close to me growing up. And I knew that the next thing I did was going to be for that same audience, those kind of salt of the earth, economic backbone that we all depend on, but sometimes is out of sight.
Hey guys, sorry for the interruption. I just need a few seconds because Soma and I have two quick favors to ask. Putting out the show each week takes about 15 to 20 hours between us, so it's a lot of effort, and it would mean the world to us if you would leave a review and mention your favorite episode. Secondly, if you're not already, go over and subscribe to the podcast on Substack. The content is free, but if you like hanging out with us each week, maybe we're even the kind of guys you'd like to buy a coffee for on occasion, consider becoming a paid subscriber. For the cost of one lavender latte a month, you can help us immensely. Thank you for tuning in consistently and helping us to share our guests' stories. Now back to the show. Interesting. So it sounds as though it was pretty clear towards the end of your time as you were wrapping up things with Samsara that you wanted to do something like this. Was it just, okay, what exactly will I do in the space, but I know it's going to be here?
Yeah, so I actually left them and went to an industrial venture capital firm to do a little bit of that thinking. And when I joined that firm, I took on the charter of helping them tackle within their venture equity arm. Basically, they co-invest not only with capital, but with their time. Eclipse Venture Capital is this VC. I basically helped them develop a couple ideas around climate. And there were two problem spaces that we got really attracted to. We were attracted to a lot in the space, but for an opportunity that we were well positioned to tackle. One was around insurance, an incredible vacuum of insurance around hazardous areas in the world. So being able to help with regions that typical and classical insurers could no longer manage the risk because of wildfires or because of flooding or other climate hazards. And we thought about that a lot, and there's still a massive opportunity there, but it wasn't the one that we ended up marrying. The other side was this increasing arm twist that carbon intensive entities were feeling, where all of us were going to them and saying, you're carbon emitting, you need to tell me about your emissions, you need to lower your emissions. And often it was kind of in a lambasting or kind of culpability framed way, when at the end of the day, all of these entities are the ones that we depend on to get from A to B. We want our packages to arrive next day, and so they've also optimized razor thin margins for us, and all these things just are emissions expensive and cost them a lot of margin, so that even if they wanted to, they don't always have the capacity to say, well, we're willing to spend some extra dollars that aren't going to be returned to us in the name of lowering our emissions. They're already kind of optimized to nothing, right? And so seeing that pressure without having a carrot, rather they were kind of running away from a stick, we thought, are the solutions, the actions that they would take, truly bad for business? And increasingly what we saw was carbon reductive solutions were increasingly actually more economical than business as usual, and reaching industrial scale. And so there was something missing where people were twisting their arm when they could actually be incentivizing them, and gravity was born out of that. So a long way of saying, I was thinking about doing something in the climate space and industry, and it was incubated while I was at Eclipse.
Okay, very nice. So you kind of mentioned it already. Some of the ideas you turned down. I am always curious about this because usually there's plenty of things that you toss away as you go through the idea process. It's not like, I guess you could say, baby entrepreneurs think, oh, I've got a great idea. It's not about the idea per se as much as it is about the product market fit. So could you talk about some of the ideas that you tossed out? They say, this is really interesting for this reason, but here's why I said no to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I already mentioned insurance, and a big reason why that one didn't end up making it was you can think about like climate tech in two very overly trivialized buckets, but one is adaptation and the other one is mitigation. And to me, insurance was very much adaptation. Just accept that we're in this world that's increasingly impacted by climate risk. So how do we adapt to it? And then mitigation was how do we actually try to reverse it and make this place more sustainable for the long haul? I found myself much more attracted to the latter bucket, and gravity is aligned to that, right? Like how do we actually not just adapt to the bleeding, but stop the bleeding? And so that was a big reason why insurance was tossed out. There are other projects that I would say I'm just not the right person for, that I still was very passionate about. Believe you me, if I had continued my college physics education and I could get into fusion research, like the amount of kind of intrigue that I have in those types of technologies is immense, but the amount of impact that I could have is marginal. And so there was also kind of a similar to product market fit, I would say founder problem fit, and I didn't have founder problem fit with all those others.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's good and humble to acknowledge that. I think it's not easy, right? To be like, oh, I really want to solve this problem, but I'm just not the right person to do it. To maybe support somebody else or leave that problem for somebody else to solve. So that's I appreciate that. Tell us more about the company today. Where's the what's the status of the company? How have you gone from kind of the idea to where you are today?
We're about 2 years into it, just a little longer than that, and we have kind of around 100 customers at this point, across both the industrial operators that we like to work with and the companies that depend on them or invest in them, like I said. We have hit milestones that I would say are aligned to later stages of funding than where we are. That's one thing that we've been really lucky to be able to achieve is we're still fairly lean and still running on our first valued round of Series Seed funding. And right now, I would say in terms of like evolution of the product, evolution of our offering, while during the first year and change, we were really aggressively focusing on making a truly automation-first platform, especially considering we saw a lot of our peers who came before us heavily invest in customer acquisition at the cost of building automation. We now are being able to extend our engineering resources to start focusing on the second chapter, where we've been doing paper and pencil kind of project execution from kind of like quoting all the way to showing up with steel-toed boots and high-vis vests on customers' facilities. We're now starting to do the digitization of our marketplace as well. So a lot of kind of exciting ongoings internally.
What has been the biggest challenge so far to get to this perspective, to get to this point?
Yeah. I saw a graph the other day. It kind of showed the path to $1 million in revenue, or the path to the Series A versus the path thereafter, and it showed that like if it was a really smooth line to the Series A, you'd have a lot of suffering thereafter, and if it's really choppy up front, you've probably done a lot of the learning that's going to help you have a smoother kind of post Series A. And so I would say we already paid the piper to an extent. I'm sure there's still a lot that's going to happen at the next inflection, but we've had a lot of kind of common growing pains. We're a lot of the team doesn't like when I say this, on the tail end of our puberty era as a company. Some things grew faster than other areas, and so we had challenges where we onboarded a ton of customers to a product that was probably still not ready for it. And that was a moment to celebrate sales, but acknowledge that we were going to have a crunch on the product side. Sometimes we developed a sales motion around a audience that wasn't ready to buy. Early on, we really wanted to go to the really kind of SMB and lower mid-market industrials that no one was talking to and make a tool for them. The fact of the matter is the cascading pressure of participating in this climate economy hasn't reached them yet. And that was a couple quarters of time that we don't get back, right? Learnings, but expensive ones. And so I would say nothing that stands out as like the most significant, but we've done a lot of kind of iterating and guessing and feeling different parts of the company grow faster than others, as well as regrettably spending a lot of time on efforts that we should have left sooner.
In terms of understanding those things and the timeline, what is in your mind, you have a lot of experience doing product management in the past as well. What do you view as a proper time to test something, to understand if it's working, assuming you're following and doing things right? Is it a quarter? Is it 2 quarters to say, okay, we really need to pivot from what we're doing? Like, what is that timeline in your mind?
Yeah. If it's a formula, there's some sort of coefficient that is around the size of the buyer, if that makes sense. So like the SMB motion, we could have probably found out within a month and a half, right? These buyers are very abundant, first of all, and you can talk to the right people, figure out fairly quickly whether or not there's an appetite. And that's more in terms of like selling vision. That's not how much time it would actually take to build the product and everything else, but before kind of really breaking ground on development, it's better to kind of test the thesis, test the slide deck. We have an internal slogan that is like the inverse of if we build it, they will come. It's if they come, we'll build it. And so I'm a big believer in like spend time validating the thesis and selling it before you actually break ground on building it. But if it's a large enterprise company that you're trying to sell to, if it's a motion that depends on Fortune 500 buyers, that might take 3 quarters to really tell you whether or not it's going to be fruitful. It might even take a year plus, right? And so it really kind of depends on the buying cycle or the typical speed of decisions made by your buying audience to be able to quickly vet whether or not like that idea is one that's going to be able to survive the test of time.
Yeah. And earlier you mentioned, this is pretty obvious to people who are in the space, that is a very competitive space. There's a lot of people in trying to get these dollars and trying to help these different companies. So what are the big things that set you apart from the competitors? I know you mentioned a marketplace, but we didn't talk too much about that. Like, what is the real differentiator that your clients say, hey, we really like to work with you versus the other 35 people who are reaching out to us on a regular basis?
Yeah, I'd say, to keep it simple, probably 3 or 4 main differentiators, of which I have to be very cognizant of the fact that some competitors will surely claim these as well. The first is the true belief in like automation over services. It doesn't mean that we don't have an incredible white glove services team in our climate strategy. The way that we've been able to scale to 100 customers while only having a couple people as part of that organization was building a platform that could do things like extract data from stacks of PDFs to API integrations into core systems. And so we really pride ourselves on not just kind of claiming that we have, but actually wowing organizations with a true automated experience when they get on the platform. The second is that we built this for entities with complex physical operations, people with boilers, people with manufacturing lines, and being able to not only speak their language, but have a product that holds their hand, because oftentimes they are up-leveling internal talent, right? This is not somebody who knows the GHG protocol. And so we often say that it is a product that's built for your suppliers. It's a product that's built for your portfolio companies, not for you. You're going to get an incredible value out of it, but this is really built around that industrial operator. The third one is very much the way that we enable distribution. A lot of people have built supply chain engagement tools or portfolio engagement tools, and at the end of the day, they unfortunately come down to kind of surveys that still put the onus on the recipient to do all the legwork. And we've built a toolkit that you distribute to your suppliers and your portcos. But the last one is the one that I truly don't think anybody has joined with carbon management, which is that we have this services marketplace. It's not just building a plan. It's not just kind of making recommendations. It's us increasingly actually facilitating, contracting with the vendors who are actually going to execute on this, and going kind of end to end on the project. We bake in a lot of value-added features into that marketplace, so it's attractive even if you don't care about carbon. We just make it better for you if you're looking to upgrade your HVAC system or electrify your fleet, to do it with a one-stop shop.
Okay, nice. So how difficult was it to build a marketplace to ensure, okay, like we've got the right people on it and also they're open to us doing this? Because I can assume, I guess my assumption would be that there's some skepticism for the partners to say, hey, I guess we'll go through you to sell our services. You know, we might want to sell it ourselves because we're better at it. But like, what is that like? What was that like?
Yeah, it was hard. It is hard. It'll continue to be hard. So I want to acknowledge that we are not deluding ourselves into thinking it'll be a piece of cake. That's part of what attracts us to it. It's going to be hard to replicate if we nail it. Your question, though, on the partners, the vendors that effectively deliver these solutions and their appetite to work with us versus selling direct, is a common one that we even internally get from the team. The reality is that a lot of these OEMs, of these original equipment manufacturers of solutions, are used to selling through channels. The lion's share of their sales is often not direct sales. Or even if it is that they have a direct sales motion, they still also have a channel sales motion. So we're not necessarily going into them and saying, you need to change the way you operate so that you work with us versus doing it yourself. We're saying, you use channels, we're going to be the best one you've ever had. I know that you have resellers, and they probably are less software enabled. They probably have less of a distribution mechanism than a carbon management audience. They probably don't marry financial incentives like government subsidies and federal grants that are increasingly becoming available. We are going to be a consolidator of all that, and treat us just like one of your resellers, but I think that you're going to increasingly want to allocate more of your resources to us, because every dollar you spend with us or every product you give to us, we're going to be able to move faster and with more success.
Yeah, okay. Got it. That is interesting. I think it is, when we first spoke, that is the idea, specifically the marketplace, that made me think, oh, okay, this is definitely different. What we talked a little bit about identifying when product market fit is there, but can you just talk slightly more in detail around, okay, this is when we knew we hit XYZ, and that's when we knew, okay, this is the right client type, because with these things you have to kind of change things and adjust it so that you have, okay, this is how we're going to go focus on our branding, our go to market, who we're going to talk to, how we're going to talk to them, etc.
Yeah, kind of a doozy of a question, and one that I don't know that people will love my answer to. I think I first want to acknowledge that there's a school of thought that product market fit is a checkered flag that you're going to cross, and that there's a very systematic way to get there. I think I saw Superhuman had the article about like building a engine to find product market fit, and it's very formulaic and it's really impressive, and I acknowledge that that works for many. For me, I think product market fit is more of a metric that continuously kind of highlights how easy it is to sell, right? And you always want to make things easier to sell. And so product market fit is just a measure of how easy it is. We are constantly pursuing it. And when it's really hard to sell, we would say like we have a very bad product market fit index at this point. But even when we got to now a couple of repetitive motions with customers, I would say there's no kind of PMF is in the rear view now. It's more like, okay, great. How do we make this even easier? What else is missing? And so for us, it's kind of going from being in a pure metal detection phase where you're walking around on the beach and trying to hear like, where is there something, and starting to dig where you found something, right? And then starting to figure out how to dig faster once you found something, while still having other people going around and being like, what other markets are ready for you? And so for us, I mentioned the SMB push, and that was hard to sell. Like, we got a couple customers, but the kind of cost per acquisition, the lifetime value, like formulaically, it just didn't make sense for us to keep doing that. And so when we found traction with industrially focused private equity firms, with upper mid-market to enterprise manufacturers, and we decided to dig in to make that a more attractive process to them, we didn't think mission accomplished. We were like, okay, great. Like, how do we do 10x that with 2x the team, right? How do we do 100x that and enable self-serve purchases, things like that? And so for us, it's increasingly honing in on how to make that easier, but never calling it done.
Got it. I like that a lot. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. That's helpful. I want to talk a little bit about talent. Obviously, my love of everything is around talent. So I guess you're around 20-ish people now. How do you think about culture building, especially early on, and picking the right people? I mean, I happen to know you have a number of people you worked with in the past, but really curious on how you think about that as you bring in those early people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, 20 is kind of one of those sweet spots where everyone still knows everybody. And I don't mean like they've seen them on Slack, they know them, they've talked to each other, and they're buddy. And what that means as a blessing is that culture is something that you can fairly quickly assess during the interview process because you're meeting such a significant part of the team. And so as an applicant, you're like, oh, I like these people. This is actually a really safe space and really cool environment. And once they come onto the team, it's really easy for everybody to kind of hold the bar on culture. And so we have cultural building blocks that we all kind of repeat internally, of course. Things like pragmatism, things like pragmatism over activism, or humility, and all these different kind of shared notions. But more important than any kind of codification of it right now is the fact that we're small enough that we can actually assess, like, does every person here fit the culture, or is anybody potentially letting the culture run unsupervised in a direction that we don't want, and we can correct for it quickly. I'll say the next phase of our growth, we're going to have to be a lot more systematic about both evangelizing what that culture is and being able to detect internally when somebody is detrimental to the overall kind of ethos of the team. So I expect us to have more of that kind of constitutional, what makes us tick, in the next chapter. But so far, it's been one of those things where the culture is the team is the culture, and we can kind of handpick the people to make sure that we continue that.
Yeah. Are there any specific principles that you tend to guide what you do by, especially as you continue to grow into the next phase? Like, I think this is something that is not necessarily easy per se, but when the company is earlier or smaller, it's not as difficult because you can kind of get by without necessarily having principles. But as you grow, I mean, you've been part of a larger team, right? So I'd be curious if you have any particular principles that you look at for growth of the team and managing culture as you go to the next phase from your past experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the pragmatism one is massive, and it's such a weighted word. I think everybody on the team is sick of me saying it, but a lot of it's rooted in, like, honestly, a crowded space where sometimes pragmatism goes at the wayside because it's a very attractive and very, for many, like, emotionally driven participation, right? The place is this that we share, this earth is getting hotter, and it's causing a lot of bad things to happen, right? And so a lot of for-profit entities right now exist, albeit being less centric on, like, value and a return on investment. And so for us, pragmatism is so critical because we need people to come in here and have a very value-obsessed mindset to how they work. Every dollar we take from somebody cannot be to give them a sticker that says that they are carbon neutral and that's it. Every dollar that we take from them cannot be just for marketing's sake. It needs to come back as $5 in energy savings. It needs to come back as a labor arbitrage where they're no longer spending as much time measuring their carbon. And so pragmatism, as it pertains to both making sure that you're prioritizing value when you're talking to organizations, making sure that you're cognizant of why they may or may not be participating in something, is one of our kind of core entities. The other one, and this one's cheesy, is kindness. And a lot of times people interpret kindness as a commentary on being sweet and bubbly with folks. And believe you me, I'm very welcoming of that attribute on the team. But we actually use the example with kindness of it's unkind not to tell somebody if there's something in their teeth. And the point here is that kindness is constructive criticism. It's letting somebody know when they're not doing something right. It's highlighting where they are doing something right, and building a culture around being the first internally to call out our shortcomings rather than letting somebody else do it. And so it's probably a rebrand of the term, but it's very much how we think, which is like if we build a culture of being okay to receive that feedback and give it, we're going to be a lot better for it.
Yeah, and I liked it a lot. I think it's a super important because you can't self correct any issues if you don't have that willingness, and even one person being unwilling to do that in a team can be really really difficult for the entire team because you kind of just put this random pillar in the middle of everywhere, and everybody's got to keep walking around it eventually, you know, and before you know it, it really starts to collect dust and cause an issue. Out of curiosity, for you more personally, like what are some of the habits that you have developed over the years that help you stay focused or that you would attribute to like being core to some of your success?
Yeah, uh, I would say I'm definitely not a exemplary demonstration of like work-life balance, but I am very much a believer of time to unwind. So exercise is really important to me, and whether exercise is running marathons for you or meditating or some sort of reprieve, I highly recommend something that is more focused on the body than just the mind because of that symbiosis. But I also unwind with watching a show at the end of the day, reading, and transparently frequenting comedy clubs in New York City probably too much as an attendee, not as a performer. Uh, and for me, that's really critical. I think being able to turn off is actually a big part of being able to show up 100% the rest of the time. And so things that really take me away from it help my brain go somewhere completely different.
Any particular books that you would say have been really influential in your life, regardless if it's recent or in the past?
Yeah, I'm a big Andy Grove fan. I think a lot of his books come to mind. I think High Output Management is a big one, and that's really cheesy business book. Maybe to go in another direction though, I really liked Ender's Game, sci-fi novel from a while back. Orson Scott Card wrote it, and that one was really empowering for me because it was this young teenager who got tasked with saving the world, and it didn't come off as like some cheesy superhero novel, but rather like the true psychological toll and the heaviness of that. So somewhere in between those two books, I would say there's something to glean.
Nice. I have to start reading more sci-fi. I realize that a lot of founders read this stuff, and I put that all behind me after I graduated, and I started reading mostly practical stuff. But what's next for the company? What are you looking forward to? What are the big challenges that lie ahead of you in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months? The things that you're really like getting ready to overcome.
Yeah. Uh, well, we grew about 400% last year from a revenue perspective. And this year we're trying to do it again. So the next 12 months are going to be a incredible sprinted marathon. I'm spending a lot of time actually scaling that sales team right now, or accordingly preparing the rest of the organization for that influx of customers. And so I anticipate the next 12 months are going to be very formative as we go from the 1 to 10 of our life cycle. Really, really get excited about hardening the marketplace and migrating from the first handful of massive wins we've had with customers to something that anybody and everybody can start to evangelize as part of working with us. And so making that marketplace increasingly a software streamlined experience is something that I'm really excited for. And then lastly, like there's just a different air at the company than there was 2 years ago. Where I won't say we're out of the garage, but there's just a lot more. Uh, there's more product, there's more customer, there's more real to it, and so I'm excited to retain the customers that have trusted us in this first chapter. We've been really lucky from a net revenue retention and kind of overall churn perspective. Our customers are really happy, but we're onboarding bigger ones. We're onboarding more of them. It was really easy to make 5 customers happy with 20 people. Can we
Yeah.
make 100 customers happy with 20? And so the last thing is like really making sure that we don't only focus on the next one, but figuring out how to keep the ones that we have, with maybe the asterisk of the ones that we want to maintain after learning more about who's the right customer for us. And so this next 12 months is going to be juggling, 7 balls of growing the company, maintaining the happiness with the customers, launching a new product line, and doing it while still getting to watch some comedy in New York.
Yes, that's good. And I guess just last final thing, if you have any ideas, broadly speaking, in space, there's still a lot to be done. There's still a lot of things that can be solved. Are there any particular startup ideas that you have, or things that you'd say, if I was forced to quit today and go do something else, these are the things that are really interesting to me, and why?
Yeah. Within the climate sector,
Yeah,
or just in
within
general?
climate.
Okay, because I was going to say we have a media literacy issue that we need to work on as well, but I'll save that for another podcast. On the climate side, there's so much. First, I shouldn't say it because we don't. Well, we don't. I don't want more competitors necessarily within the carbon management space, but there aren't any clear winners here. There are a lot of folks increasingly getting closer to being one of the many winners that are going to happen in this space, but carbon management is still nascent. The fact of the matter is, the lion's share of the companies that came out of the carbon management push were born in the last 3 years. So that's still a big opportunity. Capital will be harder, but nonetheless, it's a big win. Outside of that, though, there are so many parts of the decarbonization journeys for these companies that still need the cost curve to come down, that still need like raw innovation that I wish that I could be more capable of. I wish I'd studied chemical engineering or fusion and everything else. I've kind of mentioned it. But look at the hard tech companies. And even if you don't have a hard tech background, only a handful of people at those companies need to. There's going to be the other traditional roles of strategy, of software, of product that are available. And so whether you want to go join one of those firms or start one, they are still very hungry, and there's a lot of capital and a lot of opportunity still there.
Yeah, I like that. I'm always curious to ask people this question because it's difficult. You have to focus on the problem that you're solving, and you can't, like, if you see a problem that's not solved for your customers, you have to debate whether or not it's inside of your bucket to even bother try to solve. And if it's not, you got to say, hey, can somebody else go solve this, right? There's a huge opportunity here, and it's causing pain for other people. I wonder
Yeah.
if someday there'll be, I mean, maybe not, because people are very precious about the ideas and opportunities, but I wonder if there'll be a mechanism, because climate is not just about making startups and making money out of it. It's obviously we have to solve this problem. So I wonder if there'll be a mechanism to identify problems to help say, okay, this is like very clearly people are trying to solve this, and they're willing to pay for it, but it's super inefficient. Here's this big list
Yeah.
of problems. Entrepreneurs, go have at it, right? We'll make it happen.
Yeah.
But maybe this is my utopian view of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it does happen. It isn't the norm, but it does happen. I mean, we've seen, and the name is fraught in different audiences now, but Hyperloop was a white paper that was put out by Elon Musk. I'm not building it. Here's the papers, right? And increasingly, I think people recognize that it's better to build than to gatekeep.
Yeah.
So more open source, more public kind of discussion.
Yeah.
All these things are going to
Absolutely. Hopefully, we're doing a good job with that on the pod here. But anyways, man, any last things you want to mention? Calls to action, where people can reach you before we wrap up?
Yeah, there's so many audiences that I hope are listening here that are relevant for us to speak to. So one, like if you're looking for a job in climate, we're hiring, and we are somewhere at the sweet spot of a software platform that is going to move quickly, but gets to actually put on those steel-toed boots and get physical world stuff done as well. Separately, if you are a large corporate or you're a private equity firm or you're the industrial, we can help you with your or your supply chains or portfolios emissions. Please reach out. And otherwise, if you're in New York and you're looking for comedy recommendations, you know where to find me.
Very nice, man. I'll be coming back for a visit pretty soon. We'll have to grab a coffee when I'm back. But awesome, man. This has been a pleasure to have you on, and looking forward to putting this out in the world.
Thanks so much, Silas.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. Welcome to the takeaway section. There's as usual, three main things that were really worth bringing up for me in this section from today's podcast with Saleh. The first one is, despite there being a lot of people in the space, in this kind of carbon tracking and reporting space, he's very bullish on the need to build a good product that will genuinely serve the customers. And, some could say this is maybe kind of just delusion, but I think that what to me it stands out is that it's really, really deep self-belief in one's ability to do something better than other people, and really, really pursuing that with a lot of effort and intentionality. Obviously, it's very difficult as you build a team to make sure that everybody has that self belief. But his kind of focus on recognizing, okay, yes, there's people who are early winners, but nobody has really solved this problem for these particular people. And I just really appreciated that because it's very difficult to be in these spaces. And it came across that he was really like genuinely confident in what they're doing. So I like that a lot. Secondly, with confidence as well, Saleh also has a lot of humility in acknowledging that he wasn't the right fit. He wasn't the right founder for a particular problem that had to be solved. Especially when he was debating, what can I do in industrial decarbonization to actually help with climate change? There were some things he said no to because it wasn't really in his wheelhouse. And I think along this same line, there's a lot of these technical founders who, unlike Saleh, do go into this space. Like they have the technical chops to do it. But what happens is as they grow, they really fail to recognize the missing gaps in what they can't do to bring in partners or other team members who can help them solve those problems. And I think just having this level of humility as a founder is extremely important because we cannot be precious about our feelings or all these details. When we're trying to solve the climate crisis, we need to work very hard and get the right people in place to make it happen. It's not about our egos, or it definitely shouldn't be. If it is, you're probably not in it for the right reason. So that would be my just a takeaway I had, and if you will, to other founders. Just really acknowledge where you have gaps and be willing to go and bring other people in to help you solve those. And then thirdly, his focus on ensuring that the team, that everybody who joins the team has this pragmatism and kindness. I would reword how he said kindness. I mean, that's his choice of words, but the way I would kind of reconstruct it would be willingness to give constructive feedback. This is important because the team needs to constantly improve and grow, and you can't do that if people aren't willing to speak up and say, hey, listen, like I really don't think that's right, here's why, and do it in a good way, in a kind way, to use his words, right? So those are three things I really liked. Kind of bullishness on the space, the humility of the founder, or the recognition of the gaps for the founder, and then the focus on team and constructive feedback and making sure that we're really being quite frank with ourselves about what's going on and what we got to do. So that's all for today. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on the Clean Techies podcast.